Hello folks, my name is Lilia. Welcome to my Conscious Learning Haven. Today I'm going to share with you a few tips to help you make your English sound more natural. By meaning natural, I'm not expecting as an English teacher from any student to wake up and suddenly become a native speaker overnight. Having said that, I get hugely inspired by native speakers of English, and I think as non-native English speakers, we have a few things to learn from native English speakers if we want our English to sound fluent. In fact, there was a study that experimentally proved that a person sounds more fluent to a native speaker when they're speaking their language, when a person is able to speak quickly and their pronunciation is comprehensible and good enough, they follow sentence stress and rhythmic patterns of that language. Today, I'd really love to inspire you all guys to make your English sound a little bit more fluent and therefore be perceived as a more advanced speaker of English. Also, when I say the word natural, I mean understood internationally. I think English is growing into an international tool of learning about the world and exploring the world, and we need to be aware of that. So how do you make your English more natural? 1. Read poetry. We're used to thinking about English as a very fixed language in terms of grammatical patterns. When we're thinking about the English grammar, we think about a very fixed word order, and we also think about parts of speech and collocations and prepositions that are very rigidly formed and that contribute to the overall pattern of the English language. Having said that, if you start reading poetry, you discover that the English language can be more flexible, because in order to create a neatly rhythmic and verse-like pattern, you have to be able to play around with the language, to tinker with it, so to speak. One of my favourite poetry books would have to be Dewdrops on a Lotus Leaf, Zen Poems of Rokan. And this is a fantastic book of Japanese poetry that I personally really love. It makes me think of just, becoming a hermit and going to live in some mountains away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. I really like it. Those poems don't necessarily rhyme, but what they do is they help me understand the patterns in which the English language, as it is being translated by John Stevens, is formed. And for a non-native speaker like myself, that would have to be an interesting bit of practice. 2. Learn about register. Many people from my background, the Slavic background, when we start learning the English language, which is very different from our first language, it feels very distinct, very different. And what we try to do is we try to transfer our long-winded and flowery Slavic sentences into the English language. It feels to me that in English people think differently. When I'm in my English mode, I tend to think quite differently from what I would if I was speaking my first language, which is Russian. Any language comes in informal language and formal language, and there are different levels of formality to any language. But in English, I think the informal language is something that we call natural as far as conversation is considered. So if you want to learn to sound more natural, what you have to do is try to absorb more of that informal language. I remember my first experience when I went to do my CAE course with the Major Linguistic Centre here in Kiev, and my teacher taught me, Lilia, you know what, your English is fantastic, it's very sophisticated, it sounds very posh, but one thing you really need to work on is the vocabulary choices you make on a daily basis, because you sound a little bit like the Queen, or you sound a little bit like the President or an ambassador. And I realised that I had to focus more on learning informal language structures, and while listening to how native speakers speak, I was able to include more naturalness and more informality into my language. That's how you're perceived when you're talking to a friend in a bar, or if you're talking to a colleague during a coffee break. You can learn natural English by listening to TV series, by watching British or American or Australian, whatever they are, documentaries, listening to podcasts, listening to how people interact. One fantastic podcast that I advise all the time would have to be Luke's English podcast. I think it's very conversational, and the teacher there, whose name is Luke, very often engages in conversation with other native speakers, and they talk a lot, and they talk in very natural English that you would hear all the time if you go to an Anglophone country. And I found that absolutely inspiring. I'm super enthusiastic about that language they use, and I would really recommend it to you guys if you want to make sure that your English sounds more informal and therefore natural. 3. Listen to comedians. English comedy is difficult to understand, just like any type of comedy in any foreign language, but it's also an indicator of the fact that if you're listening to that type of comedy, that you're able to understand English at an advanced level. And I think what comedy is, it's like for a language learner would have to be an intersection between the country's culture and the country's language. So while listening to comedy, it's also a great culture-related practice to non-native speakers like ourselves, and also it allows you to pick up some jokes or understand more cultural things that inform the formation of the language, and therefore it will consequently make you a more fluent speaker. Some of my favourite comedy gems would include Alan Partridge as portrayed by Steve Coogan, and also a fantastic mockery TV show that kind of parodies British TV programmes spoken in a very posh and upper class sophisticated news language. That is called The Day to Day. I really like it. You can find it on YouTube and watch it on YouTube, and it introduces you to some of that high quality British English with a little tint of comedy. 4. Work on your pronunciation. By saying work on your pronunciation, I don't mean that you have to wake up and speak English like a native speaker overnight. That might be a fantastic direction or room for development for those of us who love the sound of English and who would really love to improve on our accents or reduce our local accents. But again, it depends on the individual whether you want to do it or not. Maybe you are the kind of person who really values the natural tilt of your native language accent when you speak English, and that gives you a very distinctive feeling of identity, and that's completely okay. But when I say work on your pronunciation, if you want to sound more natural, what I mean is learning about specific things that allow your English to sound more coherent and also more holistic, if you like. There are a few things that are associated with pronunciation in English, and those are mainly sentence stress, rhythm, linking, and schwa. I would probably say those 4 points would have to be the main ones to focus on for a Slavic learner like myself, because with Slavic languages we tend to have a very, very different type of pronunciation, even as far as the vocal point from which we extract our sounds is considered. So learning about sentence stress, the rhythmic structure of the English language, linking, how we put the words together, and the schwa sound would have to be the 4 things to focus on as far as pronunciation is concerned. 5. Speed up. Speaking pace or speaking speed is important. Do you remember about the study I told you about at the beginning of this video? When people were asked which foreigners, or which learners rather I should say, speaking their language they found more fluent, native speakers named the people who were able to say more words in a minute. That's a relative thing, and we have to have a standard against which we need to compare our speaking speed, I think. But generally, if you choose to work on your speech rate or your speaking speed, or how many words you're able to cram into 1 minute, that will definitely be a great step to making your English sound more natural, I think. In English, people speak in chunks, and the pauses we make between those chunks allow you to put your thoughts together and think what you're going to say next. That's a very natural way of speaking. I think there is a beautiful YouTube channel called English Jade that helped me a lot to improve on my sentence stress and my understanding of the rhythmic patterns in the English language. 6. This is a weird one, but it's worth checking out. Listen to native speakers' children. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you're listening to a child, you can actually observe language formation in action. What you can do is observe how the language is being formed in a person's mind from a very young age on a subconscious level. We all know that children learn through subconsciously absorbing information and absorbing the chunks of the language they're hearing. So that's something you could observe too. Try noticing those mind patterns or thinking patterns that occur in a child's mind when they speak a foreign language in an Anglophone country, or if they're a native speaker's child. I think listening to children is amazing. There is a great book that I really recommend. It's by David Crystal, and it's called Making Sense of the English Grammar. It's a very amusing read. There David describes how his children's English was being formed, and what observations he made as a scientist in the linguistic field. 7. Watch daily vlogs done by natives. Travel vlogs, beauty, game commentary, things like that. They're amazing. If you watch those daily vlogs done by native speakers, you will actually have a free chance to take a look into the real English as it's being spoken in a natural setting. And we're living in the world of YouTube, aren't we? So I think listening to daily vlogs would have to be a very up-to-date idea to focus on. I really hope those 7 techniques that I shared with you in this video will allow you to make your English sound more natural. If you're aware of any other techniques that you would really love to share and add to the content that I have shared in this video, make sure you put them in a comment section down below and share them with the rest of the world. I think English is becoming a fantastic intermediary, thanks to which we can understand each other and connect with each other all over the world. And if we do that in a way that is positive and inclusive. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it on your social media profile or share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd love to hear more from me having to do with the videos on language learning and language teaching. Bye bye for now.